Every year, the top beauty competition was not only a contest between them, but also a contest between the powers behind them. This year's situation, with Zhu Qing as the leader, the young masters of the wealthy merchants mostly stood behind Lu Yi, and behind Lu Xiaoqiao stood the many scholars of Qing and Prefecture. The others naturally also had their own supporters, but compared to these two people they were still somewhat lacking. The battle for the championship would most likely be the battle between Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi. In a while there will be a few friends coming. They are scholars from the capital. I'll introduce you to them. Zhu Qing smiled. Miss Lu has the support of the scholars led by Yang Yanzhou. In terms of poetry we are already at a disadvantage. In a while you must take advantage of the opportunity. If you can make them sincerely help you, this time, we will have more than a 70% chance of taking the championship. Lu Yi nodded, then said with some pity, "It's a pity that we didn't win over that mysteriously. If we had his help, the many scholars of Qing would not be a problem." Although Zhu Qing was a merchant, he had clearly heard of the Li that Lu Yi spoke of. Hearing this he said, "Don't worry, although the invitation we sent out was like a rock in the ocean, and the silver was returned, I heard that he did not participate in anyone's banquet. I'm afraid he doesn't have much interest in these things. Just keep an eye on Yang Yanzhou and the others." Just as he finished speaking, he saw Lu Yi look in front of her and say in surprise, "Why are they here?" Zhu Qing followed her line of sight and saw a few figures walking over from afar. "Yang Yanzhou, Wuxialover and Miss Lu, why are they?" A look of surprise also appeared on Zhu Qing's face. Although he had sent out invitations to these people, he had never thought that they would come. After all, Yi was Miss Lu's greatest rival. Why would they come to such an occasion? Although he was surprised, everyone had a legitimate competitive relationship. The necessary etiquette was still needed. It was precisely because the two of them were the greatest rivals that they had to give each other even more respect. "Brother Yang, Brother Wan, I didn't think that you would come, sorry for not going out to meet you." Zhu Qing walked over and said with cupped hands. "Sister Lu." Lu Xiaoqiao had become famous earlier than her, so Lu Yi took the initiative to greet her. No matter how intense the competition was in the dark, it could not be seen at all on the surface. The crowd only saw Zhu Qing, Yang Yanzhou, and the others laughing and chatting along the way. Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi, the two popular courtesan candidates, held hands and were as close as sisters. "I still have a few friends over there that I need to greet. I am truly sorry for neglecting Brother Yang." After some polite small talk, Zhu Qing and Lu Yi went somewhere else. Yang Yanzhou and the others could not have come to cause trouble, so they let them be. How was it? Looking at Lu Yi's departing figure, the young man beside Yang Yanzhou turned his head and asked, "You live up to your reputation?" Yang Yanzhou nodded and said, "To be able to receive such praise from the number one of Qing and Prefecture, the former number one scholar of Qing and Prefecture, was already very impressive." Wuxialover smiled and said, "It looks like it won't be so easy for Miss Yi to win first place." Lu Xiaoqiao said with a smile, "Do your best and leave it to fate. If Sister Yi wins the final courtesan title, Xiaoqiao can only congratulate you." Wuxialover laughed and said, "Miss Xiaoqiao, don't worry. Brother Yanzhou's chest is full of ink. Just a little bit will be enough to help you win first place. The title of number one scholar of Qing and Prefecture is not an undeserved reputation." Yang Yanzhou's expression was bitter as he said, "Qianyang, please don't say anything about being the number one scholar of Qing and Prefecture. Aren't you making fun of me?" Wuxialover also finally realized that he had made a mistake just now. No matter how famous Yang Yanzhou was, as long as that person was around, the title of number one scholar would never fall to him. Then he realized another problem and said, "I wonder which girl that person is supporting if." Yang Yanzhou continued, "I had originally thought that he would support the top artist of the Jade's Yard, Lady Zue Mo, but that Lady Zue Mo does not seem to have any interest in this competition. It is said that she only studies painting in her room every day. You may not know, but one of Lady Zue Mo's paintings is in high demand. A few days ago I spent 200 taels of silver to buy one." Wuxialover nodded and said, "It is also fortunate that she has no intention of competing for the title of courtesan. Otherwise she would throw out a few more frightening poems and the competition would be meaningless." Lu Xiaoqiao also secretly rejoiced in her heart. Although she did not have any relationship with that person, everyone was the same. This time the competition would still be fair. As she thought this, she raised her head and inadvertently glanced around. Two figures who had just walked in appeared in her line of sight. Chapter 301. It's her? Lu Xiaoqiao was startled. Because of the competition for courtesan belle, she naturally knew the famous peers in Qing and Prefecture. She even had a general understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. In fact, everyone had a copy of such information in their hands. Therefore she had always been very concerned about Zheng Zumo, a very threatening opponent. This kind of attention, after learning that she did not attend any banquets and did not seem to have any intention of competing for the title of courtesan belle, gradually decreased, and all their energy was focused on Lu Yi. However, they still did not dare to underestimate her, because they all knew very well that the other party was the most unstable factor in this courtesan belle competition. Therefore, seeing Zheng Zumo on such an occasion tonight, Lu Xiaoqiao would naturally think more. Could it be that she had changed her mind and decided to fight again in these last days? Having missed the best time, this hope was very slim unless Lu Xiaoqiao was not the only one who had this idea. Lu Yi also did not expect that Zheng Zumo, who never attended such banquets, would actually come tonight. After greeting her and saying a few words, she felt uneasy for no reason. After Lu Yi left, Zheng Zumo looked around and found that all the quiet places in the garden were occupied. She could only pull Xiao Chui to a relatively quiet table, planning to sit for a while and then leave. This would be considered as completing the task given to her by the procuress. Over there, looks like Miss Zumo? Doesn't she never attend such occasions? How could it be? It really is her. I haven't seen Miss Zumo for a long time. It's said that she has no intention of competing for courtesan belle. Could the rumors be wrong? However, even if she wants to compete, it's too late, isn't it? Although Zheng Zumo rarely appeared in front of people these days, the popularity she had accumulated would not fade so easily. On the contrary, because of the recent silence, there were more people paying attention to her tonight. I didn't expect Miss Zumo to come too. Looking from afar, a trace of surprise appeared on Yang Yinzhou's face. Wan Qiliang cared about other things and said, just in time. After hearing what Yinzhou said just now, I also want to buy a painting from Miss Zumo. I wonder if she will give me face and give me a discount of a few dozen taels of silver. After all, I am not as rich as brother Yinzhou. As they chatted and laughed, they walked over. Zheng Zumo naturally didn't know what the people in the distance were thinking. Looking at Xiao Chui, who was still frowning, she finally couldn't bear to let her worry, so she whispered a few words in her ear. Xiao Chui was startled. Then, a look of joy appeared on her face. Miss, is what you said true? In the future shall lower your voice. Zheng Zumo gestured for her to keep quiet. This news couldn't be announced yet. Hee, I got it. The worry on Xiao Chui's face disappeared. Since her mistress had already redeemed herself, what was the point of competing for the title of top courtesan? Wherever her mistress went, she would go. She wouldn't have to be afraid anymore. She suddenly thought of something and said, by the way, Miss, Xiao Chui has something to give you. Although the young miss no longer needed that thing, Xiao Chui still planned to give it to her. As for whether the young miss wanted to keep it or let her return it, it was up to the young miss. What is it? While Zheng Zumo was confused, she saw that after Xiao Chui searched around in her arms, her face changed and she immediately became flustered. Oh no, miss, I lost that thing. Xiao Chui stood up in a panic. Just as she was about to search along the path she came from, she suddenly saw a thin booklet lying a few steps away. She let out a long sigh of relief. Just as she was about to run over and pick it up, a pair of slender hands appeared in her line of sight. Seeing a woman pick up the booklet, Xiao Chui quickly ran over and said, I just dropped it. Oh, just because you say it's yours, it's yours. Do you have any proof? The woman glanced at Xiao Chui and flipped it open. Give it back. Xiao Chui was about to reach out and grab it, but she was pushed by the maid next to the woman. She took a few steps back and almost fell. Whose maid is this? She's so unruly. The maid glared at Xiao Chui and stood in front of the woman. The woman naturally recognized that the young girl in front of her was the maid of Zheng Zumo, the top artist of the jadeite courtyard. Otherwise, with her status, she wouldn't bother with a little maid. But who told her to be Zheng Zumo's maid? Last year, during the top courtesan selection, a certain young master who had always favored her turned to support Zheng Zumo at the last moment, causing her to lose the top courtesan selection. In this line of work, stealing a person's job was like killing their parents. She still remembered this hatred to this day. Every dog has its day. This year, her top courtesan selection was already in the bag, but the other party. The woman sneered in her heart. Did she still have a chance to turn the tables? Opening the booklet in her hand, the sneer on her face became even more intense. Did she think she could turn the tables with a few lousy poems? She casually recited the poem on the first page. There is a beauty in the north, peerless and independent. One glance can topple a city and another can topple a country. Better not know how to topple a city or a country. A beauty is hard to find. After reciting the poem, the sneer on her face disappeared. She felt some regret in her heart. Even if a renowned courtesan didn't have attainments in poetry, how could they not have the ability to appreciate beauty? This poem describing a beauty, although the style was irregular, there were no flowery words, no detailed descriptions, and the language was simple and monotonous. But why did the image of a beauty that could topple a country appear in her mind? May I ask Miss Hu, can I take a look at this poem? A voice came from behind her. Yang Yanzhou walked over with large strides and looked at her as he asked. Young Master Yang. Hu Ning'er looked at Yang Yanzhou and didn't know what to say. She had just picked up this booklet from the ground, how would she know who wrote this poem? Miss Hu, can I take a look at this item? Yang Yanzhou once again pointed at the booklet in her hand and asked. Hu Ning'er nodded her head in a daze and handed over the booklet in her hand. Yang Yanzhou was the head of the scholars in Qing'an Prefecture. He wasn't someone she could offend. Song of a beauty? I didn't think that there would still be someone who could write a folk song poem of this level. I wonder who the scholar who wrote this poem is? Can you introduce me to him? Yang Yanzhou's face showed an expression of admiration as he looked at Hu Ning'er and asked. This poem was written for our family's mistress. Following the arrival of Yang Yanzhou and Lu Xiaoqiao, the crowd gradually gathered towards them. Xiao Chui's voice was blocked out by the crowd. Hu Ning'er's expression changed a few times before she suddenly smiled and said, to tell you the truth, this poem was given to Ning'er by a young master. That young master specifically told me not to reveal his identity. I hope young Master Yang doesn't take offense. Her face carried just the right amount of apology, as if there really was something that was difficult to say. Anyone who saw this would not have any thoughts of blaming her. This song of a beauty was completely different from those obscene lyrics and songs. There wasn't a single word of description in the entire poem, and it left one's imagination running wild. Even as a woman, Hu Ning'er couldn't wait to meet the beauty in the poem. If this poem could be publicized by Yang Yanzhou, it would greatly increase her reputation. Zheng Zumo, I'll reluctantly accept this gift. Hu Ning'er muttered inwardly, and the smile on her face became even more radiant. Devastatingly beautiful? How beautiful must this woman be? Even the legendary beauty Bao Si can't be compared to her. She only listened to a few lines of the poem, yet she's so eager to meet the beauty in the poem. In the next few days, I'm afraid the Golden Phoenix Pavilion's door will be trampled to pieces. Miss Ning'er's title of courtesan belle is in the bag. If the Golden Phoenix Pavilion invests more resources, she might even be able to fight for the title of courtesan belle. Hu Ning'er's heart was blooming with joy as she listened to the crowd's discussions. Tonight's surprise was simply too big for her. At this time Yang Yanzhou flipped to a page and in the next moment, a puzzled voice sounded in her ears. The clouds think of her clothes, the flowers think of her face, the spring breeze caresses the balustrade with dew. If we don't meet in the jadeite courtyard, we will meet under the moonlight on the Yaotai Pavilion. May I know when Miss Ning'er transferred to the jadeite courtyard from the Golden Phoenix Pavilion? Jadeite courtyard? Hu Ning'er's expression froze. Chapter 302. Miss Ning'er transferred to the jadeite courtyard? I've never heard of this. I just saw her at the Golden Phoenix Pavilion yesterday. Then what does this line, if not in the jadeite courtyard, we will meet under the moonlight at the Jade Pavilion mean? Could it be that this poem isn't written for Miss Ning'er? Hearing Yang Yanzhou recite another poem, the crowd was stunned for a moment before they started to discuss among themselves. These famous courtesans didn't have to stay in the same place for the rest of their lives. It was common for them to transfer to another brothel, but this would only happen to slightly famous courtesans like the top 10 courtesans. Unless the brothel keeper was a fool, she wouldn't let go of such a cash cow. Obviously, Hu Ning'er was the Golden Phoenix Pavilion's brothel keeper's cash cow, and the possibility of her transferring to another brothel was minuscule. With this, the crowd couldn't help but think of another possibility. Could it be that this poem wasn't written for her? If that was the case, then the song of a beauty that stunned the crowd just now wasn't written for her, right? Thinking about it, although Hu Ning'er could be considered beautiful, it was too much of an exaggeration to say that she was devastatingly beautiful. Even she herself wouldn't dare to admit it. As for the second poem, the rosy clouds are her clothes, the flowers are her face, the spring breeze caresses the railings, the dewdrops moisten the flowers making them more vibrant. Such a beauty, if not in the jadeite courtyard, we will meet under the moonlight at the Jade Pavilion. This was also a poem praising a beauty. Compared to it, the soft waist and soft limbs, skillful in singing and dancing, that had been spreading like wildfire these days could only be considered as obscene lyrics. The previous beauty song and the poem just now were definitely a rare masterpiece. It was unknown which great talent had written them. Some people even felt that it was a great waste to use such a poem on a few courtesans in a brothel. If not in the jadeite courtyard, the jadeite courtyard. Finally, someone came back to his senses and murmured, "These two poems are both about a girl in the jade courtyard. Could it be Chen Miao Miao who has been in the limelight recently?" In the crowd, Chen Miao Miao's face was blushing. She didn't dare to admit that these two poems were written for her even if she had 10 guts. She knew herself. If she was really like what was written in the poems, how could the title of the top artist in the Jade's courtyard fall on Zheng Zimo's head? After a familiar figure appeared in her mind, Chen Miao Miao finally understood. Of course, there was no lack of people in the crowd who understood the situation. After a short moment of commotion, the place suddenly fell silent again. Everyone turned their gazes and looked at the woman who was not far away. The woman was comforting the servant girl who was on the verge of tears. From afar she heard the servant girl say, "Miss, she snatched the poem that Li gave you, Li." In the circle of scholars in Qing and Fu, whenever these three words were mentioned their hearts would tremble. As a result, those with the surname Li did not dare to let outsiders call them young master. Since it was that person, then all of this could be explained. Thinking of the rumors between him and Lady Zimo, everyone immediately understood. Yang Yanzhou held the thin book in his hand. From time to time voices could be heard. There is a beautiful person like a clear breeze. Adding 1 point is too long, subtracting 1 point is too short. Her form like a graceful swan, like a swimming dragon. Wan Qiliang stood beside Yang Yanzhou in a daze and murmured, "Bullying, this is too much." Every single one of them could be used as the finale, enough for an outdated courtesan to make a comeback. Yet they were tossed out so casually and there were so many of them at once. In this way, how could Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi fight for first place? Hu Ning'er's face was pale and she almost lost her footing. She forced a smile and said, "I was just joking just now. These poems were naturally not written for Ning'er. I picked it up on the ground just now. I'm afraid someone lost it." Yang Yanzhou and Wan Qiliang only had eyes for the book and did not pay attention to Hu Ning'er at all. The latter moved her gaze away from the book and exclaimed, "To think that someone could reach the pinnacle of folk song poems, songs of Chu and poetry. I'm afraid we will not be able to catch up even if we spend our entire lives." Suddenly he asked in confusion, "Luo Shen Fu, it compares the woman one admires to a goddess. The words are beautiful but not impetuous, and the portrayal is already at the pinnacle. It is fascinating. But where is this Luo River? I've never heard of it before. Could it be made up?" Yang Yanzhou's gaze did not move away from the book. He said, "Luo River is the ancient name of Yuan River. Last night you and I were boating on Yuan River. Moreover, the name Luo Shen is commonly seen in ancient books. How could it be made up?" Wan Qiliang naturally knew that his knowledge was far from Yang Yanzhou's. If he said there was, then there must be. It's him, it can only be him. Yang Yanzhou murmured. A hint of unwillingness appeared on his face, but he then shook his head with a wry smile. He had already given up on the idea of comparing himself to him in this life. At this time the crowd slowly parted to form a path. Zheng Zimo and Xiao Chui walked over. Yang Yanzhou walked over and said, "Miss Zimo, I have a request. Can I make a copy of the poem book in my hand?" In fact, even now, Zheng Zimo did not know what was written in the book. She was also very confused. When did Li Yi give this to her? Why didn't Xiao Chui tell her? Also, why was Hu Ning'er's face so pale? Why were these people looking at her like that? All the mysteries were contained in the thin book that Yang Yanzhou handed over. She took the book and flipped it open. 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages. As the former top courtesan, her attainments in poetry were naturally not bad. Gradually, her pretty face began to blush inexplicably. Were these poems all talking about her? Was she really that good? Looking at those extremely extravagant descriptions, she could not help but think of the scene that night. She only felt that even the roots of her ears were beginning to burn. Outside the crowd, after Zhu Qing came back to her senses, she turned to the few young people beside her and asked, "How is it? Are you confident? Confident? Those poems have already praised that woman to the heavens. Among all the scholars in the Jing kingdom, who would dare say the word confident?" The leading young man shook his head. This was already beyond the scope of their competition. It was better to save some face. In the field, Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi looked at each other and saw the deep helplessness in each other's eyes. The two of them had fought for so long, but in the end, it was still like drawing water with a sieve. And the few people who had hopes of becoming the top courtesan, including Qin Miao Miao, all looked at Hu Ning with incomparably fierce eyes, as if they wanted to skin her alive. They did not want to compete for the top courtesan anymore. Damn Hu Ning, why did she have to recite poems for no reason? Sensing their malice, Hu Ning's face became even paler. She had probably become everyone's public enemy. Chapter 303. Stupid girl, why didn't you tell me such an important thing earlier? As soon as the two returned to the jade courtyard and closed the door, Zheng Zumo slapped Xiao Chui's butt hard. Xiao Chui covered her butt and said pitifully, I was worried that Miss wouldn't agree. She secretly stuck out her tongue and didn't care at all. Who asked them to gossip all day long? This time she finally shut everyone's mouth. Don't make your own decisions in the future. Zheng Zumo glared at her angrily. At this moment she secretly rejoiced in her heart. Fortunately she had redeemed her freedom before this. If it had been a few hours later, her mother wouldn't have agreed to let her leave. Miss, what should we do now? Xiao Chui rubbed her butt and asked. What else can we do? Zheng Zumo glared at her and said, hurry up and pack up. We'll leave from the back door. Where to? Xiao Chui asked doubtfully. Let's get out of here first. Zheng Zumo replied and began to pack up. She was entangled by those people and didn't rush back until the end of the banquet. She had to leave as soon as possible. Otherwise, when tonight's events spread, she wouldn't be able to leave even if she wanted to. During the top beauty competition, such information was extremely sensitive. A certain scholar offered a poem to the top girl, a certain young man spent a lot of money to win a beauty smile. The news spread so fast that it was hard to imagine. Within an hour, even a notice might be posted. Seeing Xiao Chui carry out a big box, Zheng Zumo said grumpily, pick something valuable. Don't bring anything worthless. Remember, don't forget your secret stash of money hidden under the bed. At this time, in a certain room in the attic, the madam of the jade courtyard was counting her little treasury. Each piece of jewelry shone with a charming radiance under the light. She counted and wiped the silver, and the smile on her old face never stopped. When Miao Miao won the title of top beauty, the future wealth would come rolling in. Mom. Suddenly, an anxious voice came from outside the door. The madam's expression changed. She hurriedly covered the things on the bed with a blanket and walked over to open the door. She frowned and asked, why are you panicking? Have you forgotten the rules I taught you? Mom, there are a lot of people at the entrance of our jade courtyard, the woman outside said breathlessly. Many people? The madam locked the door from the outside and followed her downstairs. From afar she could hear a commotion outside the door. A few servants blocked the door from the inside, and a series of knocking sounds came from the outside. Are these people Miao Miao's admirers? The madam murmured. She could only think of this possibility. She strode over and said, hurry up and open the door. We're doing business. How can we lock our customers outside? He kicked the legs of the servants a few times and opened the door. After taking a look outside, he immediately closed the door and hurriedly said, quickly close the door, don't let them in. Seeing the dense crowd outside, the brothel keeper's face turned pale. How could this be considered a customer? If so many people rushed in at once, it would be more than enough to tear down the jadeite courtyard. Wah! Everyone was originally crowded at the door. Seeing the closed door suddenly open, how could they let it be closed again? With a crash they all rushed inside. Before they rushed in, the brothel keeper had already scrambled up the stairs. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat. Were these people really here to tear down the jadeite courtyard? Where were the officials? Why hadn't the damn officials come yet? As if hearing the call of the brothel keeper, a sudden shout came from outside the door. More than 10 bailiffs all unsheathed their weapons and blocked more people outside. Louis walked in with his waist saber in hand. He frowned and asked, what's going on? Why are they all here? Ever since he heard from his subordinates that there were hundreds of people blocking the entrance of the jadeite courtyard, Louis hurried over, thinking that there was a riot. He even sent someone to inform the soldiers stationed in the city. However, when he came here, he found that things didn't seem to be what he thought. I heard that Miss Zue Amo of the jadeite courtyard is devastatingly beautiful. She is a rare beauty in the world. Madam, why don't you invite her out and let us have a look? Someone in the crowd said loudly. Immediately, the majority of the people in the crowd agreed with him. We came here because of her reputation. We want to see what the Jade Pool Fairy looks like. Nonsense, she is obviously the Luo Shui Fairy. If there really is such a wonderful person in the world, of course we have to see her. The bailiffs' faces were filled with astonishment. Motherf asterisk her. So many people had made such a scene just to see a woman? My lord is really clever. He even predicted this kind of thing. Thinking of what the county commandant said to him before he left, Louis's heart suddenly had more respect for him. Zuemo. Jade Pool Fairy Luo Shui Fairy? The brothel keeper of the jadeite courtyard, who didn't know what happened, looked confused. She was the one who asked Zuemo to attend the banquet tonight. Could it be that something happened at the banquet? Go and ask Zuemo to come out. Now was not the time to be curious. The brothel keeper hurriedly ordered a servant. If Zuemo didn't come out, the jadeite courtyard might really be destroyed by them. The servant hurriedly ran to the backyard. After a while, he ran back with a pale face and said in a trembling voice, Miss Zuemo? Gone. Gone? The brothel keeper murmured. Seeing that the people below had gradually retreated from the hall under the persuasion of the officials, she couldn't help but feel a little relieved. Zuemo had already redeemed herself. She could leave whenever she wanted. The first thing now was to figure out what happened. If these people came every day, how could they do business? Seeing Qin Miao Miao coming in from outside, the brothel keeper hurriedly greeted her. After a while, after Qin Miao Miao told the cause and effect of the matter, the brothel keeper looked dull, her old face was pale and her legs were weak. She held on to the wall to barely stand. In other words, they really just wanted to see Zuemo? Someone wrote more than 10 excellent poems for Zuemo? If she goes to compete for the top spot now, the probability of success is more than 50%. The brothel keeper closed her eyes and murmured, just now she used 1,000 taels to redeem herself. Oh my God, what sin have I committed? She seemed to see a huge mountain of gold gradually leaving her. She wanted to use a knife to cut off a piece of her heart. She was filled with regret and then she fainted. Zuemo redeemed herself? Hearing this news, Qin Miao Miao's face immediately filled with ecstasy. Since she no longer belonged to this line of work, no matter how famous she was, she had no right to compete for the top courtesan. On the contrary, because of her, the jadeite courtyard became more famous. Perhaps she could also benefit a little. Tonight, the jadeite courtyard was destined to be the liveliest place in Qingyan Prefecture. No one knew that just as the gate of the jadeite courtyard was blocked so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through, two handsome young masters carrying bags walked out from the back door of the jadeite courtyard. They went around to the front door and swaggered past the crowd. Chapter 304. It's been 6 days. Xuanhuan sat in the yard and habitually counted her fingers and muttered to herself. Son-in-law and second miss had been walking for 6 days. They should be arriving in the capital soon. Yesterday the lantern festival had passed. Miss took her to the street to see the lanterns. When they came back, they bought a few beautiful lanterns to hang in the room. If son-in-law was here, he wouldn't have to spend money to buy them. The person who sold the lanterns said that as long as he guessed the riddles, he could take the lanterns back. Son-in-law was very good at guessing riddles. He would definitely lose money. There was some noise outside. She heard it in the yard just now. It seemed that Uncle Fong and the others went to the brothel yesterday when Aunt was not at home. When they came out, they were caught on the spot by the aunties who came back from the temple. Last night the house was noisy all night. Early in the morning they could see the brooms raised high in the yard next door. A figure suddenly jumped in from the door. Fong made a shushing gesture to Xuanhuan and whispered, "I'll hide here. Don't tell your aunt." As he spoke, he quickly flashed into the storage room. Xuanhuan sighed. Uncle Fong was such an honest person. Why did he like to go to such an unscrupulous place? She pouted in the direction of the storage room to Aunt Fong, who was chasing from outside. Lying on the rocking chair, it was very comfortable. No wonder son-in-law liked to lie on it before. There was a scream from the room. A figure rushed out of the room and crawled out of the yard. Aunt Fong hurriedly chased after him with the broom in her hand. In the yard next to Rui Square, several long tables were put together. On the table was a huge canvas. A woman in a humble dress with a wooden hairpin in her hair was holding a brush in her hand. The tip of the brush was moving on the canvas. The painting in front of her was more than half finished. The scenery was vivid. A tall tower stood on Lonely Mountain. Huge waves thousands of feet high swept from the front, as if they were going to drown the whole mountain. This was a scene from the Legend of the White Snake, which was the most popular play in recent days. It was called The Flooding of Jinshan. The mountain was so majestic that it looked like it was about to come out of the canvas. The water was so strong that it looked like it was going to surge out of the canvas. From afar it was very shocking. Wan Ruoqing walked out of the room, shook her head and said, You can keep your composure. There are people out there who are willing to pay 3,000 taels of silver just to see you. Even a portrait can be sold for more than 100 taels of silver. Why do you work so hard for a few dozen copper coins? It's different. After standing for a long time, Zheng Zumo twisted her sore waist and said, I don't care. You promised to take me in anyway. You can't go back on your word now. Your fame has already spread out of Qing and Prefecture. Everyone knows about the goddess of Luo Shui. The Song of a Beauty and the Ode of the Goddess of Luo have been passed around and copied by countless people. It is said that the price of the paper in Qing and Prefecture is 10% higher than usual. Wan Ruoqing looked at her and teased. Who would have thought that the Goddess of Jade Pool and Goddess of Luo Shui, that everyone in Qing and Prefecture knows about, is such a scoundrel? What Goddess of Luo Shui? It's all his fault. A trace of embarrassment appeared on Zheng Zumo's face. Every time she heard others recite these lines, she couldn't help but think of that night when she was honest with him. Once the Luo Shenfu was released, her fame grew even greater than before. The matter of the #1 scholar of Qing and Fu composing a poem for a beauty also became a legend. As long as it was a woman, there was no one who did not envy her. Those poems would definitely be passed down. Whenever it was mentioned in the future, Zheng Zumo's name would also appear. She had truly become famous throughout the ages, but she just wanted to live a peaceful life in the future. After this incident, this wish became an extravagant hope. She had to cover her face even when she went out, afraid of being recognized. How could there be a peaceful life? As for the culprit who caused all of this, he didn't know where he was currently enjoying himself. If you don't like it, you might as well give me that book of poems. Wan Ruoqing looked at her and said with a smile, I'm afraid you can't bear to part with it. Without that book of poems, our goddess of Luo Shui won't have something to hold and smile at every night. And you're talking about me? I don't know who it is that has to take out that sky lamp to look at every 2 days. Zheng Zumo's pretty face blushed slightly, but she didn't lose out at all. An imperceptible trace of envy appeared in Wan Ruoqing's eyes. She changed the topic and said, the top 10 courtesans of Upper Yuan Night have already been selected. Don't you want to know who the courtesans are this year? Who else can it be? It's just that the battle for the first place is a little more intense, but it's just a competition between Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi. Lu Yi wants to surpass Lu Xiaoqiao, who has the support of Qing and Scholar with just a few businessmen. I'm afraid it won't be so easy for her to get the first place. As for the others, it's probably those old faces. Zheng Zumo added a few more strokes on the canvas and said indifferently. Wan Ruoqing nodded and said, Indeed, Lu Yi lost to Lu Xiaoqiao by a small margin in the end, and could only settle for second place. In addition to the two of them, there are 4 other courtesans who are still famous. The Jade Courtyard lost you and gained Chen Miao Miao. Seeing the madam's figure disappear, Zheng Zumo's heart relaxed for no reason. Finally here. Looking at the city walls that were much taller and more majestic than Qing and Prefecture City, Li Yi let out a long breath and relaxed. Chapter 305. Of course, Li Yi wasn't the only one who relaxed. When they reached the foot of the city, the 11 guards nimbly dismounted. After traveling back and forth for half a month, they finally returned to the capital. Lu Rui jumped down from the carriage and looked at the most prosperous city in the Jing Kingdom. Outside the city gates, there were people weaving in and out, and there was an endless stream of carriages and horses. It was far more prosperous than Qing and Prefecture. Was this the capital? Behind her, the guards looked at her with respect. During the journey, no one dared to look at her as a weak girl. The young master really had the foresight to bring a girl like this along. Just as they were facing dozens of bandits as if they were facing a great enemy, they only saw the light of a sword flash and a white shadow weave through the crowd of bandits. In a moment, all the bandits could only lie on the ground and wail. Those with power were always respected by others. Even though she was a girl, these proud guards were willing to lower their heads. Elder Li ordered, Li Zheng, send 2 people back to the mansion first and tell the news of the young master's return. A moment later, 2 people handed their horses over to their companions and galloped into the city. Galloping on horseback was not allowed in the city, so galloping was much faster. Young master, let's go, Elder Li said with a smile. Li nodded and re-entered the carriage. The carriage slowly moved forward. Through the gap, he looked at the green stone slabs that were moving backward. His heart was very calm. As they neared the capital, the strange feeling in his heart gradually dissipated. It wouldn't be long before it completely disappeared. This made Li Yi feel that this trip was not in vain. On the way, Uncle Li had already told him everything about the current situation of the Li family. The old master of the Li family had made great contributions during the founding of the kingdom. He was promoted to a county magistrate and established the original foundation for the Li family. Decades ago, the Li family was considered prominent in the capital. However, with the passing of the old master, the descendants of the Li family did not make enough contributions to maintain their titles. The titles were reduced from generation to generation until the old master passed away. The Li family gradually declined until they were almost kicked out of the ranks of nobles. As the eldest son of the direct line of descent, Li Yi's father was supposed to inherit the Li family's business. However, for a woman he gave up everything and left for a faraway place. After the previous head of the family passed away, the heir to the title could only be the second son of the direct line of descent. Thus, the title became a county magistrate. Of course, other than the title, he also had an official position in the court. He was the pillar of the Li family. The carriage slowly entered the city. The green stone paved street was at least twice the size of the main street of Qingyan Manor. Even so, the street was slightly crowded. There was an endless stream of people and carriages. After the carriage traveled for about 15 minutes, the number of people on the road gradually decreased. The houses on both sides of the street became more and more imposing. Uncle Li shouted excitedly, "We're here!" The carriage stopped. Li Yi and Lu Rui disembarked. "Young master, the old madam is already waiting in the inner hall. Let's go quickly." The guard who had left earlier walked out of the crowd and said, "Young master, come with me. We'll go see the old madam first." Uncle Li walked over and said, "Young master, come with me. We'll go see the old madam first." Li Yi was a junior, so he naturally couldn't let the elders welcome him at the door. Under the confused and curious gazes of the servants, he stepped into the Li family's front door. Although the Li family had declined, the house was still imposing. Li didn't know how many corridors and moon doors they passed through before they arrived in front of a spacious hall. Before they entered the hall, a trembling figure walked out of the house with the help of a walking stick. "My poor child." The old madam with a face full of wrinkles and white hair shook off the support of the servant girls and walked unsteadily to Li Yi. She held his hand as tears streamed down her face. Li didn't know what to do with this sudden scene. He could only let the old madam hold him. Seeing her crying tears of joy, Li Yi sighed softly and said with difficulty, "Grandmother, I'm back." The old madam didn't hide her emotions at all. It made Li Yi think of the old madam in another world. His heart couldn't help but be moved. "It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back." The old madam used her sleeve to wipe away the tears on her face. She looked up and down at Li Yi and murmured, "It can't be wrong, it can't be wrong. He's practically carved out of the same mold as Ming Han. He's a child of my Li family." As if remembering something sad, the old madam's mood became low again. "My poor child Ming Han." In Li Yi's memory, he hadn't seen the father of the original owner of his body mention anything about the family. However, every year during the Double Yang festival he would get drunk and say things like, "Mother, I'm unfilial. I've let you down," with tears streaming down his face. It could be seen how important the old madam was in his heart. Along the way he learned from Uncle Li that the old madam loved her eldest son the most. In the past 20 years she often cried late at night and became ill from worry. Her health had always been poor. Suddenly the old madam seemed to notice something. She suddenly looked at Lu Rui who was standing beside Li Yi. Her eyes lit up and she let go of Li Yi. She hurriedly walked over and held her hand. "Is this my granddaughter-in-law? You're so pretty. My grandson has good taste. Come, let grandmother take a good look." Hearing the old madam say, "granddaughter-in-law," the guard named Li Zheng's expression changed drastically. A few days ago he was dragged by the collar and thrown out of the courtyard by this heroine because he called her second madam. Even now his butt was still aching. If the old madam was thrown out, she would lose her life. However, the scene that he was worried about did not happen. The old madam held Lu Rui's hand. The more she looked at her, the more satisfied she was. The wrinkles on her face smoothed out. She took off a bracelet from her wrist and said, "This is the first time I'm meeting my granddaughter-in-law. I don't have anything good to give you. Take this bracelet. From now on you're a member of the Li family." Mississippi Lu, who was always fearless and could even poke a hole in the sky when she was angry, seemed to be at a loss. She looked at Li Yi with a pleading gaze. Li could only walk over and explain, "Grandmother, the madam is not feeling well. She couldn't stand the fatigue of the long journey, so she didn't come with us. This is my wife's sister. Sisters are like a family. It's the same, it's the same." But the old madam didn't seem to hear Li Yi's words. She put the bracelet on Lu Rui's wrist with a smile. What do you mean by it's the same? Li stood there in a daze. He was speechless for a moment. Uncle Li, who was standing at the side, watched the old madam put the bracelet on the wrist of the madam's second daughter. His eyes widened and his face was full of disbelief. This bracelet was put on by the old madam when she married the master. It had always been passed down to the first wife of the Li family. The second wife begged the old madam for decades, but the old madam didn't give it to her. Could it be that she was so happy at this moment that she forgot about it? Chapter 306. The Li family obviously had a tradition of valuing females over males. After seeing her precious granddaughter-in-law, old mistress completely forgot about the existence of Li Yi, her real grandson. She pulled Lu Rui's hand and walked into the house. Old mistress's enthusiasm far exceeded Li Yi's imagination. At this moment he could only follow behind them. However, a few maidservants beside old mistress stole a glance at this young master whom they were meeting for the first time. After being discovered by Li Yi, they turned their heads away with blushing faces. There were quite a number of people in the hall. When old mistress pulled Lu Rui in, the crowd happened to come out to welcome them. Good. A middle-aged man in his 30s strode over to Li Yi. He patted his shoulder hard and said a few words with a face full of good. Li Yi felt some pain in his shoulder, but when he saw the man's slightly red eyes, he didn't argue with him. Young master, this is second master. You should call him second uncle, Uncle Li reminded him. There were 3 sons and 1 daughter in the direct line of descent in the Li family. The eldest son was not around, so the second son inherited the family business. This meant that the person in front of him was the master of the Li family, the uncle of the original owner of this body. Second uncle, Li bowed and greeted. Perhaps it was because they shared the same bloodline. Even though it was the first time they met, he couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity with these people. This is third master, Uncle Li said as he pointed to another younger man. Li bowed again. This third uncle only nodded slightly and didn't appear to be very enthusiastic. Li didn't mind this. Uncle Li had told him long ago that the third master of the Li family had a mild temper. He treated everyone like this and didn't have any ill intentions. There were second uncles and third uncles. Naturally, there were second aunts and third aunts. As long as one was born in a big family, which man did not have at least 1 or 2 concubines? Li recognized a circle of people, but in the end he only remembered the most important ones. Most of the womenfolk were circling around Rui. Li saw a woman point at the bracelet that old mistress had just given her. She exclaimed with an exaggerated expression, "This bracelet looks so familiar. It looks like the one that old mistress is wearing." Then, everyone's eyes were glued to the bracelet on Lu Rui's wrist. Some were amazed, some were envious, and some were jealous. Li immediately knew that old mistress might have given a big gift. These 2 children have been on the road for a few days. I'm sure they're exhausted. They've met everyone they need to meet. Let them go and have a good rest. If there's anything else, we'll talk about it at night. After a while, the old mistress issued an order. Out of all virtues, filial piety was the most important. The ancients had deeply implemented this traditional virtue. In this family, the men made the decisions for external matters. As for the domestic matters, old mistress was the one in charge. Rui, come with grandmother for a while. When Li was escorted away by a few maidservants, he saw old mistress holding Mississippi Lu's hand and happily walking to the back hall. Although this was still a society that valued appearance, and it was easier to be liked by others if one was beautiful, Li felt that the way old mistress looked at him was not quite normal. Just as he was feeling puzzled, he was brought into a room by a few maidservants. A pretty maidservant said crisply, "Young master, this servant will help you bathe." It had been a tiring journey and he was really tired. It would be nice to have a comfortable hot bath. Li took off his outer robe and suddenly felt that something was wrong. He turned around and saw that a few maidservants were standing behind him, looking at him with red faces. There was clearly some kind of light in their eyes. Li did not have the habit of being surrounded by people when he was bathing. He just wanted to have a good bath alone. After the bathtub and hot water were prepared, he sent them out. Lying comfortably in the bathtub, he began to miss xuanhuan. At this time, if only he could have a little maidservant's hands massaging his shoulders. How good would it be? He had arrived at the capital, and the favor was almost repaid. When old mistress's birthday was over, he could say goodbye. Rui and xuanhuan were still waiting for him at home. No matter how big the Li family's business was, it was not his turn to inherit it. Moreover, he was really not interested in it. Coming to visit the Li family was just the obsession of the child in his dream. Li Yi had a premonition that when he dreamed again, he would not be able to see him. Just as Li Yi was lying comfortably in the bathtub, a few maidservants sat in the corridor by the door and whispered, "That is the young master." It seems that the story of the young master running away from home 20 years ago is true. A maidservant with 2 buns exclaimed. A slightly older maidservant whispered, "Of course it is true. The elders in the manor all know that the young master ran away with a woman. Otherwise, how could the second master become the master? I heard from old mistress that the young master looks exactly like the young master. I don't know if it is true." A round-faced maidservant murmured, "It is true, it is true. There is a portrait of the young master in old mistress's temple. I have seen it before. The person in the portrait is very similar to the young master. Old mistress always cries when she looks at the portrait. It should be the young master. The young master is really handsome. Although he looks thin when he takes off his clothes, he is really well built. Say, who do you think old mistress will send to serve the young master?" In these large families, the maidservants who served the young master would usually become concubines. Although it was not to say that they would fly up the branches and become phoenixes, they would be able to live a life of luxury. Therefore, becoming the young master's maidservant was the dream of most maidservants. Hearing this, one of them sneered, "Stop dreaming. I think the young master doesn't have any feelings for us at all. Otherwise he wouldn't have driven us all out just now. Even young mistress's second daughter is so beautiful. I think young mistress is also a first-class beauty. Will the young master like us?" The maidservant who spoke just now was obviously disappointed. She changed the topic and said, "Old mistress likes the second daughter very much. She even gave the jade bracelet on her hand to her. I heard that the jade bracelet is only passed down to the first wife of the Li family. Second mistress has always wanted the jade bracelet, but old mistress never gave it to her. This time, second mistress will definitely be unhappy." When they had nothing to do, they would secretly gossip about their masters. It was probably one of the few entertainment for these servants. Especially when there was no one around, the topic would also be bolder. At this time, in a hall at the back of the house, an angry woman pointed at Li Mingzi, the current head of the Li family, and said, Look how biased she is. Can that bracelet be given away so casually? Does she want that outsider woman to be the first wife of the Li family?" I knew it. After so many years, the old lady is still thinking about her eldest son. She keeps calling him, good grandson. Does she still care about us? She can give away the family heirloom bracelets today and she can give away the Li family tomorrow. Shut up. Li Mingzi suddenly pounded the table, stood up and said, "He is the only blood of my eldest brother. He is a descendant of the Li family. I owe my eldest brother too much. I can't treat this child badly. Don't say these words again." After that, he directly flicked his sleeves and left, leaving only the woman in the hall, cursing even louder. As soon as Li Yi woke up, he felt refreshed. It was rare that he didn't have any dreams recently. He raised his head and looked out of the window, finding that it was already dark. "Young master, old mistress asked me to take you to dinner." After knocking on the door, a clear and crisp voice was heard. Chapter 307. The Li family was really big. More importantly, the roads were all twisted and turned, and there were moon doors one after another. Li Yi was not very good at recognizing the roads. After a simple wash of his face, he was still led by a young servant girl through the house. A big family was a big family. They even had a specific place to eat. They were not like those from small villages. Wherever there was a place to squat, that was the dining hall. Just as he walked through the door, a beautiful woman in her early 30s walked over. She pulled his hand and looked him up and down. "You really are Big Brother's child. You look exactly like Big Brother when he was young." The women of the Li family had the habit of holding people's hands when they met. When they were in the mood, they might even rub their faces a few times. Li Yi's face was almost deformed by the beautiful woman's pulling, but he still forced a smile and said, "You must be Auntie, your nephew greets Auntie." The old madam had 3 sons and 1 daughter. Based on the way she addressed him, Li Yi quickly determined the identity of the beautiful woman in front of him. The old madam's youngest daughter was also his aunt in name. "Good child, come and sit. You must be tired from the journey." The women of the Li family were also very friendly. He had been in this world for more than half a year, but this was the first time Li Yi felt like he was being welcomed by everyone. It was like he had returned home after a long journey. Of course, being touched was one thing. He knew very well that his home was in Qing and Fu, not in the capital. He was pulled by the beautiful woman to sit next to the old madam. Opposite him was Mississippi Lu, who had changed into a new set of clothes. On her wrist was a jade bracelet given to her by the old mistress, and the hairpins on her head were replaced with a pair that she had never seen before. She just sat there quietly, and the butterfly wings on the hairpins fluttered slowly. One look and one could tell that it was worth a lot of money. The sword that never left her side was nowhere to be found. After not seeing her for a while, she had changed from a peerless heroine to a lady of a noble family. Needless to say, this must be the credit of the old mistress. Only the old grandma's family was eating with them, and they controlled the core power of the Li family. Besides second uncle and third uncle's family that he had met in the morning, there was also this aunt who kept asking questions. At the end of the table, a child stared at Li with wide eyes. He was very curious that this stranger he had never seen before could sit next to the old grandma. It was said that in a wealthy family one should not talk while eating. This was the most basic rule, but Li found that this rule did not apply to the Li family. The beautiful woman beside him kept asking him questions, and even the old grandma would occasionally add a few words. Of course, most of the questions were about his life these years, but most of them were about the father that he had never met. Fortunately, the strange dreams he had these days were probably the memories hidden in the depths of this body. It was easy for him to answer. He was only telling the truth, but the old grandma and the beautiful woman listened with tears in their eyes. "Your father has never told you about the Li family?" The old grandma rubbed her eyes and asked without batting an eyelid. Li shook his head. This was the truth. Ever since he was young, no one had said a word to him about the Li family in the capital. The old grandma sighed and said sadly, "That year, in order to separate them, the old master almost caused your mother's death. He still hates us." Li did not know that there was such a thing. No wonder in his memory, his father was always brooding over his mother's death. It seemed that the reason he did not want to talk about the Li family was mostly because of this. Not wanting the old grandma to be too sad, the beautiful woman quickly changed the topic and asked, "I heard from Butler Li that Little Ear is now a county lieutenant, and it was personally conferred by the emperor?" With regards to this form of address, Li could not react for a moment. Mississippi Lu, who was sitting opposite him, almost spat out the soup in her mouth. She patted her chest and looked at Li with a mocking gaze. "It is the emperor's favor." Li could only nod his head and say, "Since you have received the emperor's favor, you should be more diligent. You have passed the imperial examinations at such a young age, which shows that you are very talented. Why did you not participate in the imperial examinations these past few years?" The middle-aged man sitting opposite the beautiful woman put down his chopsticks and looked at Li. Without waiting for Li to answer, he spoke again, "Any officials of the 7th rank and above will be promoted to the imperial scholar rank. Although you have received the emperor's favor, you should also study hard and strive to become an imperial scholar as soon as possible." The moment he opened his mouth, it was as if he was admonishing Li. The emperor's favor was vast, and it was often vast. Perhaps just because of a poem or an article, if it caught the emperor's eye, one could be promoted to an official position. As the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Li Mingzi had seen many of these things. Every year, if not 100, there would be at least 80. Although he was curious as to what Li had done to earn the emperor's praise, he was not too surprised. No matter what, he was considered the most promising one among the younger generation of the Li family. Thinking about the situation of the younger generation of the Li family, he looked at the two people sitting below him and said, "Injia Inkai, the two of you should also learn from your elder brother. Inkai should listen to the teacher's teachings, don't just think about playing around all day. As for Injia, you will be married in a few months, don't go to the red light district anymore." Li Mingzi no longer had any hope for his son. He planned to help him find an official position in the future so that he could live a stable life. Even if the Li family lost their nobility in a few decades, after so many years of business, they would not fall into a situation where they could be bullied. After Li Mingzi finished speaking, a young man at the end of the table nodded his head. He felt as if he had been shot in the chest by an arrow. However, even if you gave him 10 guts, he would not dare to refute his father's words. As for the young man who was quickly shoveling food into his mouth with a wooden spoon, he only shook his round head. He was most afraid of this second uncle of his. Whatever second uncle said he would do. Hurry up and finish eating. It was time to dig out the bird's nest in the tree in the yard. Fortunately, Li was already immune to this kind of words. He even had to thank Professor Foam. He smiled and said that he would definitely study hard. In his heart, he thought that there were still 7 days until the old mistress's birthday. He wanted to have some time to experience the local customs of the capital. Then he packed his luggage and rushed home. He heard that if he took a boat from the capital, he would arrive at Qing'an Prefecture in less than 2 days. Leaving the White Emperor in the morning among the colorful clouds, 1,000 miles of Jiangling returned in a day. This should be a scene like this, right? The meal was very harmonious. From the bits and pieces of conversation, Li Yi had a deeper understanding of the current Li family. In the capital, the political center of the Jing kingdom, a viscount was indeed not much. A random brick thrown on the street could kill 2 people. However, those families that were once prominent all had some history and would not decline so easily. This second uncle of his, other than being a viscount, was also an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. He could be considered a high-ranking official in the court. At his age, it was very likely that he would advance further in his lifetime. As long as he did not commit any political crimes, he could at least ensure the safety of the Li family for decades. In this kind of Li family, it did not matter much whether he was there or not. It was uncomfortable to be controlled by others and everything. It was better to return to the small Qing'an prefecture and live life with Rui in that small courtyard. After sending away the servant girl arranged by the old mistress, he sat in the courtyard assigned to him. The moon on the 16th of the first month was quite round, but there were only a few stars. In the capital, that idiot Li Xian's wedding should have already ended. He did not know if he had returned or not. Her Royal Highness would probably not be able to dress up as a constable and parade around the city. Little E, as Li Yi was thinking about this, a strange voice came from the top of the wall. Chapter 308. The Li family in the capital didn't have such a treasure as a rocking chair. Li Yi leaned on the small chair and looked at the white shadow standing on the wall. He said lazily, "Little thing, is that your childhood nickname? Why haven't I heard Rui mention it before?" Rui was stunned for a moment. Then she realized that this nickname seemed to be suitable for her. She wanted to make fun of Li Yi, but she didn't expect that she would get herself into trouble. There was a trace of annoyance on her pretty face. She threw away the servant girl who was anxiously shouting for her to come down and jumped down from the wall. "When are you going back?" She walked to Li Yi and said coldly with her sword in her arms. The impolite Mississippi Lu almost never called him brother-in-law. Li Yi was already used to it. Maybe since that day when she rode on the horse and looked at him as if he was a prey and said, "Take him away," she never planned to be a well-behaved sister-in-law. "We'll leave after my birthday. If we take the boat, it will only take 2 days. Lu Rui secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She didn't ask more and changed the topic. "Madam is going to the temple outside the city to burn incense tomorrow. I'll go with her. Do you want to go?" "No." Li Yi shook his head and said decisively. "Forget it," Mississippi Lu said coldly. She tiptoed and flew to the top of the wall. The servant girl opposite her screamed again. Li Yi looked at the courtyard next door. Mississippi Lu was just 17 years old. She was just a child. Although she always pretended to be cold and mature, the nature of a young girl couldn't be changed. Rui had always protected her and the little environmental protector very well. Although Rui was good at martial arts, her mind was rarely pure. Under her cold appearance, there was a lively, playful heart. Rui knew that she didn't want to get too involved with the Li family, so she didn't come with him. Instead, she asked Rui to go with him. One reason was to protect her, and the other was to let her go out and relax. Thinking of her character, Li Yi couldn't help but worry about Rui's future. Although it was the beginning of spring after the Spring Festival, the weather started to warm up. People still had to wait until the Upper Yuan dynasty to feel the spring. The wind was gentle, the air was clear, and the sun was bright. The snow on the mountain had long melted. Today was a good day for traveling. Every year on the 17th day of the first lunar month, the cold mountain temple outside the city would hold a temple fair. Every time at this time, believers from all over the world would go up the mountain to worship. Scholars would offer some incense, praying that they would be able to graduate in the coming year. At that time they would definitely give the Buddha a golden body. Young ladies hoped to find their Mr. Right as soon as possible. Newlyweds often went to pray to the goddess of mercy. In a feudal society, it was normal for the people to be a bit feudal. Without science, they had to believe in something. Today the old lady was also going to the cold mountain temple to fulfill her vow. She was accompanied by a large group of maids, a dozen guards, and a heroine with superb martial arts skills. As for Li Yi, he was just going out for a walk out of boredom. The Cold Mountain Temple was naturally on Cold Mountain. It had nothing to do with the Cold Mountain Temple, which was the Cold Mountain Temple outside the city of Gusu, where the bell rings at midnight on the passenger ships. It was a short mountain no more than 100 meters above sea level. Because of the Cold Mountain Temple, it became famous. Li Yi sat in the carriage. After leaving the city, the journey began to be bumpy. He was not the only one in the carriage. The chubby brat was chewing on a juicy chicken leg, completely ignoring Li Yi. To the brat, this chicken leg was much more interesting than this elder brother who had appeared out of nowhere. If Li Yi remembered correctly, the brat in front of him was called Li Yingkai. He was the son of third uncle Li Mingyuan. This time, he had been dragged out of the house by his mother. A chicken leg was in his hands, but after a while only a few bones were left. There was not a trace of meat left on the bones. This showed that this brat was an expert at eating chicken legs. It wasn't until he sucked all 10 of his fingers and took out a few pieces of preserved fruit to stuff into his mouth that Li Yi realized that there was a reason why this brat was so strong at such a young age. As if he felt a little embarrassed eating alone, the brat took out a piece of preserved fruit, looked at it longingly and handed it to Li Yi. Li Yi had just seen him lick his hand like a bear's paw. Looking at the preserved fruit, he smiled and shook his head in refusal. The brat was clearly very happy. With a turn of his hand, he stuffed the preserved fruit into his own mouth. The cold mountain temple was not far. After traveling for about an hour, they arrived at the foot of Cold Mountain. The stone steps paved with bluestone extended all the way from the foot of the mountain to the summit. There were already quite a few people climbing up the stone steps. The old man's body was inconvenient, so the carriage took a flat mountain path. The brat had just eaten something and had begun to fart non-stop in the carriage. Li Yi had no choice but to jump off the carriage and tell the driver that he planned to go up the mountain on foot. When the time came, they could meet up at the top of the mountain. The air outside was much fresher, and there was even a faint fragrance in the air. Li Yi noticed that there were many plum blossoms planted on both sides of the mountain path. In the last 2 days the blossoms were in full bloom. Almost every young lady wearing a veil on their head had one, and the stone steps were covered in flower petals. Li Yi had not taken a few steps when he unexpectedly saw a blue-robed scholar plucking a plum blossom and inserting it into his hair. He had the bearing of a song scholar, a group of people who spoiled the scenery. A perfectly fine plum blossom had been broken into a mess, and they actually thought it was an elegant affair. Several people with flowers in their hair, who called themselves scholars, were reciting poems in front of a bare plum tree. The stone steps were not steep, but they were very long. It took Li Yi about a quarter of an hour to walk up the stone steps. When he arrived at the top of the mountain, he finally understood why he had met so many young masters and ladies along the way. The Cold Mountain Temple was not a lonely temple. In fact, the entire mountain top was under the jurisdiction of the Cold Mountain Temple, including the surrounding plum blossom forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. The young ladies with the veil toured the plum blossom forest. Low chants and light laughter could be heard from the veil. The scholars spread a plain cloth under the plum tree, sat cross-legged, raised their cups and drank to their heart's content. When they recited a good poem, it began to rain plum blossoms. When the peach and apricot trees were still bare branches, this endless plum blossom forest was indeed a good place to go for an outing. No wonder the Cold Mountain Temple chose to hold the temple fair today. This plum blossom forest would attract many scholars and beauties. After enjoying the plum blossom forest, they would go in to worship the Bodhisattva and Buddha. Naturally, they would also offer incense. These bald donkeys really knew how to pick the right time. Naturally, Li Yi was not in the mood to enjoy the plum blossom forest alone. 2 coachmen were guarding outside the temple. They said that the old mistress had brought everyone into the temple to offer incense and to visit a famous monk. They were afraid that they would not come out for a while. Deeply educated by Marxism-Leninism, Li Yi did not believe in Buddha in the past. However, since something as unimaginable as time travel could happen, what else was impossible? He respectfully lit a stick of incense and threw a piece of silver into the merit box. Then he leisurely strolled around the temple. He did not like crowded places, so he chose quiet paths. The antique temple also had a unique charm. It was simple and dignified, which was something that the temples of later generations did not have. After passing through a few arched doors, the people gradually became sparse. When he walked out of the last moon door, a plum blossom forest that was even more flourishing than the outside appeared in front of him. "Why are you worried, almsgiver?" An old voice came from the plum blossom forest. "Life is full of unsatisfactory things." "How can I not be worried?" The young man's voice continued. Li Yi stopped and a look of interest appeared on his face. He took a few steps forward and saw the backs of an old monk and a young man in the depths of the plum blossom forest. Hearing the young man's words, the old monk casually pointed at a plum tree and smiled without saying a word. Li Yi stood behind the two and watched the scene in a daze. Could this be the legendary Zen master and the young man? The young man was enlightened and murmured, "Master, do you mean that the plum blossoms have endured the bitter winter to have the fragrance they have today? The hardship is temporary, but as long as it is endured, it will bloom in spring?" Li really did not want to spoil a perfect joke. He laughed until he held his stomach and said, "No, what master means is, what are you talking about in front of the plum blossom?" Oh. The young man suddenly turned his head and pointed at Li, who was standing behind him. Just as he was about to speak, his mouth opened halfway. The expression on his face was as if he had seen a ghost. Li laughed so hard that he could not straighten his back. He cupped his hands and said, "Sorry, I couldn't hold it in. Please continue. It was not good to spoil other people's discussion of Zen." Li planned to laugh again after he left. He did not look at the old monk and the young man's reaction. He guessed that they were still pondering the meaning of his words. He turned and walked in the direction he came from. Seeing Li's reaction, a look of doubt appeared on the young man's face. Seeing that Li was about to walk out, he hurriedly said, "Brother, please wait." Hearing the young man's words, Li's footsteps sped up. He thought to himself that this guy did not want to continue discussing Zen with the old monk. Why did he come to me? Stop. Just as he was about to walk out of the moon door, two figures suddenly flashed in front of him and blocked his way. Seeing the two men standing in front of him, Li was stunned. The expression on his face was also as if he had seen a ghost. Chapter 309. Looking at the two familiar faces in front of him, Li was shocked. Why were Li Xian's guards here? These two were Li Xian's godlike followers. Generally speaking, wherever Li Xian appeared, there would be their shadows. Could it be that the slightly familiar voice he heard just now was, sure enough, when Li thought of a certain possibility, an ecstatic face appeared in front of him. "You've also come to the capital?" There were 4 great joys in life: rain after a long drought, meeting an old friend in a foreign land, wedding night, and getting a place in the imperial examinations. For Li Xian, wedding night was not a happy event. As the crown prince of Ningguang, his status was noble. There was no need for him to get a place in the imperial examinations. Only meeting an old friend in a foreign land could be considered an extreme joy. "I'm originally from the capital. Do you know me, brother?" Seeing the young man looking at him with a puzzled expression, Li Xian was a little stunned. After a closer look, he found that the other person's style of dressing was very different from before. In Li's own words, he did not like to wear such showy clothes. His voice also seemed to be very different. Could it be that he had recognized the wrong person? Come to think of it, he had decisively rejected Mingzhu's invitation to come to the capital to become an official. 10 days ago, the two of them were still drinking and chatting merrily in the jadeite courtyard. Unless Li set foot on the road to the capital as soon as he left Qing and prefecture, it would be impossible to see him here. But in this world, were there really two people who looked so similar? "May I know this brother's name?" "I'm Li." Li cupped his hands in salute. An actor's self-cultivation, the basics of dramatic performance, an actor's learning manual. Li at this moment felt like he was possessed by the best actor. If he worked hard, it was not impossible for him to win an Oscar. As for changing one's voice, the art of changing one's appearance and voice was an essential skill in the martial arts world. With just a little bit of skill, one could become a qualified voice actress. Li Xian no longer doubted his identity. After all, if it was really Li, it was impossible for him not to recognize him. At this moment he began to be interested in this person called Li Ming. Their appearances were more than 90% similar, and they were both surnamed Li. If it was said that the two of them didn't have any relationship, he wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. Could it be that this person called Li Ming was Li's twin brother? Li Xian, who thought he had discovered a great secret, immediately forgot all his worries and asked curiously, "Do you know someone called Li? He looks almost exactly like you. Are you from Qing Prefecture and know my elder brother?" The young man looked at him with surprise. "Haha, I know, of course I know." Li Xian laughed and said, "I really didn't think that Li would actually have a younger brother that looks exactly like him. This is so fun." Li sighed in his heart. With Li Xian's intelligence, to be able to live peacefully until he was 20 years old, he must have accumulated a lot of good karma in his previous life. He didn't plan to reveal his identity now. Before he realized it, he could still have 2 days of leisure. At this moment, a guard walked over and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince's consort is coming." Li turned around and saw a group of people walking over. "Haha, I'm afraid I won't have the chance today. Li Ming, right? When I'm free, I'll find you for a drink." Li Xian laughed and strode forward. As long as he knew his name, investigating him was a very easy matter. The crown prince's consort? He saw a group of maids surrounding a woman with a curtain as she walked over. The woman's figure was not bad, but as for what she looked like, it was covered by a layer of white gauze, so he couldn't see it clearly. Li Xian hadn't been in the capital for long. It seemed that his marriage had only happened a few days ago. It was said that his crown prince's consort was the legitimate daughter of a wealthy family in the Jing kingdom. Her status was incomparably noble, and she was also an outstanding beauty. However, the two of them didn't stick together all day long during their honeymoon period. Li Xian, this fellow, was discussing the problem of worry with the old monk. Could it be that the couple's life was not harmonious? If that was the case, finding the old monk would be useless. He should go find an old Chinese doctor. Husband, have you seen Grandmaster Sandalwood Yin? Li Xian walked over with a smile on his face, and a light voice came from the veil. Li Xian nodded and said, Great Master Tan Yin is well versed in Buddhism and is worthy of being an enlightened monk. I have benefited a lot from talking with the Great Master. Husband's complexion is very good. I presume that the Great Master has already dispelled husband's doubts. Ling Long, before you leave, double the amount of incense in the temple. The woman's voice was soft. A maid beside her immediately nodded in agreement. Since you've finished offering incense and paying respects to the Buddha, let's return early. After saying this, Li Xian walked forward with large strides. The lips of the woman in the curtain moved, but in the end, she didn't say the words of appreciating the plum blossoms together. She let out a long sigh and said, Let's go. The luxurious carriage slowly descended along the mountain path. Dozens of guards surrounded the carriage. Inside the carriage, the woman who had already taken off the curtain sat upright on the brocade couch. She looked out the window at the young man who would rather ride a horse than ride in the same carriage as her. Her eyes were slightly lowered, and her fair hands tightly gripped the hem of her dress. I wonder what expression Mingzu would have if she knew that Li Yi has a brother who looks exactly like him? Li Xian rode on the horse with a strange smile on his face. Your Highness. A guard rode a horse and whispered as he caught up to him. What is it? Li Xian turned to look at him. Just now at Cold Mountain Temple. The guard hesitated for a moment and said, I think I saw Miss Rui. Miss Rui? Li Xian raised his brows. Which Miss Rui? Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he pulled on the reins of the horse and asked, Are you talking about Mississippi Lu? Maybe I saw wrongly. Maybe they just look alike, the guard said after thinking for a moment. It was a coincidence if it happened once, but it was inevitable if it happened twice. An excited expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He pointed at a few people and said, The few of you follow me up the mountain. The rest of you, escort the crown princess back to the residence. A few clouds of dust disappeared from the mountain path. Inside the carriage, the woman revealed a disappointed expression. She put down the curtain and said, Let's go. Li Yi was looking at the old monk in front of him with a vigilant expression. In just the blink of an eye, the old monk had appeared in front of him. It was enough to show that the old monk was an expert. At the very least, he couldn't beat him. When I pointed at the plum tree just now, I meant to say that a moment of suffering is nothing and that there will be a day of happiness after suffering, just like what the benefactor said. The old monk looked at Li Yi with a smile and asked, Young benefactor, how could you have such a misunderstanding? Li Yi understood that the old monk might be unhappy with his interruption just now. This was not a joke on the internet in the future, but a real Zen master. When facing a real Zen master, he naturally couldn't just casually make up a joke to deal with it. Li Yi's expression turned serious and then he smiled mysteriously. He looked at the old monk and said, The Buddha said it can't be said, it can't be said. After saying that, he elegantly turned around and strode back in the direction from where he came. The old monk was stunned on the spot. After a long time, a smile appeared on his old face. He looked at the direction in which Li Yi left and said, All appearances are fabricated. Worry is also empty and worry is also empty. I was too obsessed with appearances. Young benefactor, you have great wisdom. Chapter 310. He pulled out a line in Buddhist language that he had heard from somewhere, and he didn't know if it was Buddhist language or not. In any case, that line, which he didn't understand but felt awesome, had frightened the old monk. Taking advantage of the fact that he hadn't recovered his wits, he hurriedly ran away. Who knew whether or not he would use the 1,000-leaf palm of great compassion and great compassion to strike him when he woke up? Cold Mountain Temple was not small, with innumerable halls and pavilions. The old madam seemed to be listening to some famous monk preach the scriptures. For a moment he didn't know where Rui and the others had gone, so Li decided to just stroll around the temple. The temple fair would last for 3 days. In these 3 days, there was an endless stream of visitors to Cold Mountain. There were believers who came to pray to Buddha and burn incense, as well as young men and women who came solely to admire the plum blossoms. The sharp-witted peddlers had long since grasped this opportunity and had long since found a spot at the top of the mountain, selling little trinkets like combs, wooden tablets, and so on. They claimed that these items were treasures that had been consecrated by the high monks of Cold Mountain Temple. 10 copper coins couldn't buy them, 10 copper coins couldn't buy them, and 10 copper coins naturally couldn't buy a comb either. Treasures personally consecrated by the high monks were not for sale for less than 1 copper coin. In addition, there was naturally no lack of people selling food. On a plaza far away from the plum blossom forest, a space had been cleared out. Peddlers carrying poles stood next to each other, loudly shouting steamed buns and noodles. They were not allowed to go to the plum blossom forest, saying that it would spoil the mood of those nobles. Any young master or young lady there was not someone they could afford to offend. A chubby boy dressed in embroidered clothes ran out of the plum blossom forest, huffing and puffing. He threw down a handful of silver and in a short while he ran into the forest with a large pile of food. Under a plum tree, a little girl of about 7 or 8 raised her head in anticipation. "Little Candy, eat." The chubby boy ran over, panting heavily, and placed all the things he had bought on the white cloth on the ground. "Thank you, big brother," the little girl said sweetly. She first picked up a piece of candied plum and gave it to the chubby boy, then she sat down and began to eat. There were quite a few children of this age in the forest. They came out with their families, so it was impossible for them to quietly chant sutras and worship Buddha with the adults. In order to prevent them from making noise in the temple, most families would let their servants watch over them and let them play by themselves in the plum blossom forest. At this moment, there were a few servants standing behind the 2 children. Seeing the 2 young masters eating quietly, they began to chat. "Hey Fatty Lee, you are here too." A few youths dressed in embroidered clothes quickly surrounded them as if they had discovered a new continent. The little fatty's expression changed at first, then he puffed out his chest and said, "Chin Xiaodan, I don't want to fight with you today. Why are you eating every time I see you? I think you might as well not call yourself Li Yingkai, call yourself Pig Li instead." The few of them clearly had enmity with each other. The youth in embroidered clothes looked at the things on the white cloth and sneered, "Sure enough, it's Fat Pig Li. I'm afraid only pigs would eat these things." "Big brother?" The little girl nervously grabbed onto the corner of the little fatty's clothes. "Pig Li, is this your sister? I thought everyone in your family was as fat as you." The youth in embroidered clothes laughed out loud. He suddenly ran over and fiercely stepped on the food on the white cloth. He pulled the little girl's face and pointed to the ground, saying, "This is the real pig's feed. How could a child bear such humiliation?" The little fatty only felt his blood rushing to his head, and he punched the chest of the youth in embroidered clothes. "You dare to make a move, hit him." The youth in embroidered clothes seemed to be waiting for this moment. After avoiding the punch, he immediately shouted. Several youths behind him immediately swarmed up and pressed the little fatty to the ground. The little girl on the side was so scared that she cried out. The faces of several servants changed. Just as they were about to come over and pull them away, they were blocked by a few people who had been following behind the youth in embroidered clothes. There were many figures in the plum forest. Many people saw the scene here. Seeing that it was just a few children playing, they didn't take it to heart. "Hey Fatty Lee, as long as you call me Grandpa, I'll let you go. How about it?" The youth in embroidered clothes squatted down and patted the little fatty's face. "Call you Grandpa." The little fatty had the advantage in size. He suddenly turned over and broke free from the few youths behind him. With a tiger pounce, he pressed the youth in embroidered clothes under his body. "Only when I'm full will I have the strength to beat you." With a loud shout, he clenched his fist and punched the youth in embroidered clothes. In the end, his fist didn't land on the face of the youth in embroidered robes. A young man grabbed his arm from behind and threw him to the side. He helped the pale-faced youth in embroidered robes up and said in a flattering manner, "Young master, are you all right?" Many people around frowned. A few children playing was nothing, but this young man attacking a child was a bit too much. "Catch him for me." Just now he was almost beaten by Li Yingkai. The youth in embroidered clothes had a pale face. He was so angry that he stomped his feet and said to the young man, "Stop." The few servants of the little fatty were firmly blocked and could not rush over. They could only shout anxiously. Looking at the man walking towards him, The little fatty rubbed his bruised wrist and stood up with the help of a tree. He stared at the man with an unyielding expression. Who are they? How can they be so domineering in the cold mountain temple? Someone around asked doubtfully. Lower your voice. That is the young master of Duke Chen's family. The little fatty is called Li Yingkai. He should be the younger generation of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Personnel. No wonder. These two families have been feuding for more than 10 years. However, it is a bit too shameless for a man to attack a child. That should be High Duke Chen's bodyguards. Little fatty only has a few servants who don't know martial arts. He's definitely going to suffer this time. However, it's just a joke between the younger generation. It won't be a big deal. Originally, there were a few people who disliked the man's behavior. After hearing that he was from Duke Chen's family, they immediately stopped talking. For most people, these words still carried a lot of weight. The little fatty gritted his teeth. When he saw the man's hand reach over, he was about to rush over. However, a hand reached out from behind him and grabbed the man's wrist. With a gentle shake, the man fell to the ground holding his arm and could not get up. At the same time, he felt someone pat him on the shoulder and a voice came from behind him. If you are being bullied, fight back yourself. The little fatty turned around and looked at the familiar figure. After a moment of shock, he shouted and rushed towards the youth in embroidered robes. The youth in embroidered robes wanted to run, but his reaction was a beat too slow. Soon he was once again pounced on by the little fatty. The surrounding youths quickly rushed over to help, but they were unable to stop the little fatty's fist from landing on the youth in embroidered robes' face. The faces of the men blocking the little fatty's servants changed. Just as they were about to step forward, they saw the young man walking towards them. Let the children deal with their own matters. We should not interfere. Get out of my way. One of the men said impatiently. Just as he was about to walk past the young man, his body flew backwards in the next moment. So, there is no room for discussion? The young man looked at the men who were looking at him warily and the smile on his face disappeared. Chapter 311. Just now, Li Yi's view of this little fatty who was always thinking about eating changed. He knew that he was no match for him, but he was still unyielding. When fighting, he still remembered to protect the little girl behind him. It was hard to tell that this little fatty who was a little hot-blooded was actually the son of his third uncle, who was always indifferent no matter what happened. Even if the world was destroyed, it would have nothing to do with him. The grudges between children should be solved by them in their own way. It was fair no matter who won or lost. There was no need for these lackeys to intervene. You're courting death. Seeing that the young man kicked one of their people away, the remaining 4 guards were immediately furious. One of them went around to help the young man in embroidered clothes, while the other 3 surrounded Li Yi. The 2 people that were dealt with just now, one was a trick and the other was a surprise attack. Among the remaining 3, one of them gave him a little pressure. Even if he could deal with them, he would not feel good. At the very least, he would have to take a few punches and kicks. Li Yi was not prepared to be beaten. He looked at the young man who was watching the show with his arms crossed and asked, "How long are you going to watch?" Bang! The man walking towards the little fatty was sent flying by Li Xian's bodyguard with a kick. Li Xian walked over with a playful look in his eyes. He looked at him and said, "I couldn't tell that brother Li Ming actually had such skills." Li Yi looked puzzled. "You've seen my brother?" Li Xian's footsteps paused, and the expression on his face began to become suspicious. "Who are you people? How dare you interfere in my business?" Seeing that one of their own people was sent flying, and this guy who came out of nowhere treated them as nothing, one of the 3 people, who was obviously a bit tough and irritable, said angrily. Even though the capital was full of nobles, the Qin public house could be considered as a giant. Except for the imperial family and a few families that couldn't be provoked, it was basically an existence that could do whatever it wanted. Don't look at this big man's rough appearance. He was able to stay close to the young master and protect him. He had never heard that the Li family had any powerful backing, not to mention that the people in front of him were very unfamiliar. They were not the families that they couldn't afford to offend, so what was there to worry about? Your father? Li Yi looked at the man in surprise and gave him a thumbs up in his heart. Daring to call himself lousy in front of Prince Ning's crown prince? Was this guy trying to rebel and become Prince Ning himself? The royal family cared a lot about their dignity. Being disrespectful to the emperor was a serious crime that could result in beheading. This person dared to call the emperor brother, so he was a good man with courage. Jianghu could be considered as a courageous man, but in the end he was chopped into pieces by Emperor Qin Shi Huang. There were so many courageous men on Mount Liang, but in the end, all of them were wiped out. Since the ancient times, all the courageous men were now dead. From this, it could be seen that hot-blooded men usually did not have a good ending. Not long after the man said the word, lousy, he was slapped in the face by one of Li Xian's guards, causing him to spit out all his teeth. By the time the other two reacted, their shoulders had already been pressed down, and they couldn't move at all. Break their legs. The leader of Li Xian's guards made the decision on his own. Don't you dare. We are from the house of High Duke Chen. Both of their legs were about to be broken. If they didn't raise the flag now, it would be too late. Usually, when they bullied others, most of them would just give them a beating. Even when they were dealing with those insignificant lords, they wouldn't break their legs. This was an act that completely shed all pretense of cordiality. When the leader of the guards heard this, he turned and looked at Li Xian. In the next moment, he turned back and said to the guards, since they are from the house of High Duke Chen, just break one of their legs. In order not to disturb the atmosphere of people admiring the flowers, and to be a civilized person, the guards decided to drag them out of the peach forest and break their legs. At this time, the outcome of the fight with the little fatty had also been decided. It had to be said that when it came to fighting, the fatty had a natural advantage. The four youths had lived a luxurious life since they were young. They probably hadn't put in much effort to practice martial arts. They only used simple punches and kicks. If the strength was light, hitting the little fatty's body was like scratching an itch. However, if they were hit by the little fatty's fist, they could only squat on the ground and cry. There was no other outcome. In a short while, the four youths were all knocked to the ground. The little fatty crawled up from the ground and panted heavily. He patted the dust off his body, completely ignoring his bruised and swollen face. He looked down at the four defeated youths and said loudly, "Didn't you want to fight? Get up." If he pointed to the sky and shouted, "Who else?" He was afraid that he would be struck by lightning if he acted so pretentiously. Hearing this, the few youngsters in embroidered clothes crawled up from the ground and quickly ran out of sight. This is. Li Xian pointed at the little fatty who looked like the leader of the martial arts world. Li shook his head and said, "We'll talk about this later. Young master." Only then did the servants have time to run over. When they saw the little fatty's sorry state, they were about to cry. "I'm fine." The little fatty wiped his snot. Although his body was in great pain, his heart was sweeter than eating candied fruit. He ran to the little girl's side and held her hand, saying, "The delicious food is all dirty. Big brother will buy it for you later." A servant walked to Li Yi worriedly and said, "Young master, those are the sons of High Duke Chen's family. Young master beat them up. We're in big trouble." High Duke Chen? Li Yi looked at him and asked, "If it wasn't for today's incident, would they have caused less trouble for the Li family?" The servant was speechless for a moment. Young master's words seemed to make sense. The Chen and Li family had been at odds for more than 10 years. The Chen family had been intentionally or unintentionally suppressing the Li family for so many years. It could be said that the Chen family had a lot to do with the Li family's rapid decline. High Duke. There were only a few High Dukes in a country. The small Li family obviously couldn't afford to offend a first-class duke, but someone could. Li Yi turned to look at Li Xian and asked, "Can we afford to offend High Duke Chen?" Li Xian didn't seem to hear Li Yi's words. He looked at the little fatty, then looked at Li Yi and murmured, "Young master. Young master, when did you have a son like this?" It seemed like he could afford to offend them. Li Yi felt that this world was quite unfair. They both had the surname Li, but why was there such a big difference? When the Li family was at its peak, there was still a big gap between them and the Chen family. The two families could have been on good terms, but in the end, the daughter of the High Duke was abandoned. It was no different from a slap in the face to the Chen family. Since then, the two families became enemies and they went down the road of love and hate. Even if Li Xian didn't appear today, he would still stand up for the little fatty. First, as a member of the Li family, he couldn't watch him get bullied by others. Second, the reason why the Chen and Li families were in such a situation today was entirely because of his stubborn father. Li Yi felt very wronged. He didn't do many bad things in his previous life. He just didn't dare to help an old lady who fell, picked up some money on the street, and casually spent it. He didn't offend anyone. He transmigrated peacefully, but he somehow got involved in the fight of the pugilistic world and family disputes. Whatever he did, there would be people who opposed him. Even if he didn't do anything, there would be people who wanted to step on him. Wasn't it good to live a good life? If he had transmigrated into Dazhuang and Dazhuang's body, there wouldn't have been so many messy things, right? It was only the second day he came to the capital, and he already offended a High Duke. Fortunately, he had that brother's godly assistance. With one sentence he also dragged the royal family into the matter. Chapter 3:12. Behind the young men in embroidered clothes, the guards who were acting violently just now were now being carried by others. They were wailing incessantly, and one of their legs was bent at a strange angle. Li Xian's guards walked over from behind and stood quietly behind him. Their faces regained their calm expression, as if they were not the ones who broke someone's leg just now. At this time, the difference between professional guards and non-professionals was reflected. Li Yi once again realized the importance of bringing a few reliable bodyguards when he went out. People like Mississippi Lu who were always missing at critical moments would definitely starve to death in this line of work. Brother Li Qing, it's them? The leading young man in embroidered clothes pointed at Li Yi and the others, and said loudly to the young man beside him. After saying that, he gritted his teeth and looked at the little fatty opposite him, who had his head held high and chest out, as if his eyes were about to spit fire. It's just child's play. Don't you think you've gone too far by doing this? The young man walked forward and looked at Li Yi with a frown. As he spoke, he was also sizing up the people opposite him. In the capital city, he knew all the young men of similar age with a background. He even met a few of the emperor's princes a few times. These two people obviously did not belong to any of them. However, they dared to ignore High Duke Chen's residence. The dignity of a High Duke was only worth a leg in their eyes. If they did not really have a powerful background, then they were lunatics. However, before figuring out the identity of the other party, he would not go too far. He first tried to sound them out. Seeing that the other party was frowning and looking at him as if he wanted to seek justice for those people, Li Yi sighed in his heart. This was how the world was. The right was always in the hands of the few, the rich and the powerful. When he tried to reason with them, they insisted on using force. When they lost to Li Xian's guards in terms of force, they turned around and tried to reason with him. This was not the way to bully people, right? All the young masters and young mistresses present can testify that our young master clearly said just now that the children's affairs will be dealt with by themselves and did not intervene in the quarrel between the young masters. However, your family's guards actually bullied the young. I'm afraid that this is damaging to the dignity of High Duke Chen, isn't it? The servants of the Li family also felt that the young man was distorting the truth. Those people's legs were broken, but what did it have to do with their young master? It was obvious that they were blind and offended that young master, which caused the disaster. The Li family was not going to take the blame. Not bad. Indeed. The surrounding young masters and young ladies nodded in agreement. Although it was unreasonable for the young master to allow the little fatty to fight with a few children, he still knew his limits. On the other hand, Duke Chen's guard actually disregarded his status and attacked a child. It was a little too shameless. Moreover, in the beginning, it was the few kids from High Duke Chen's family who provoked them first. The little fatty was not weak at all. After what happened just now, he had already won a good impression in everyone's hearts. As for the bodyguards who had their legs broken, they had only themselves to blame. How could someone who could bring so many powerful bodyguards with him be an ordinary person? The house of High Duke Chen might be a colossus in the eyes of ordinary people, but what kind of place was the capital? There might not be many people who did not respect the house of High Duke Chen, but a few bodyguards who relied on their master's power would not be taken seriously. Feeling the gazes from the surrounding people, the young man felt a little embarrassed. He said, even if they are in the wrong, isn't it too cruel to break people's legs so easily? Li Yi realized that this guy seemed to have set his sights on him. From the beginning to the end, he only broke one person's arm and sent another flying with a kick. The person who broke their legs was standing behind Li Xian. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. If he had the ability, he could go and find them. What was the logic of always coming after him? Moreover, what was so cruel about breaking a person's leg? That guy wanted to be Li Xian's father and be brothers with the emperor. It was already benevolent of His Highness that he was not beaten to death. Even if he went up and slapped Li Xian twice or kicked him twice, his crime would be much lighter than calling himself father in front of him. In the end, there were still people who were reasonable. A guard with a broken leg couldn't help but point at Li Xian's group and said, "Young Master Cheng, our injuries were done by those people." Chen Liqing had the thought of personally breaking his other leg. Damn it, can't you just say it all at once? After talking for so long, you haven't even found the culprit. Are you kidding me? At this moment he was also secretly cursing his bad luck. Why couldn't they just stay at home? Why did they have to bring a few friends to the Cold Mountain Temple to enjoy the plum blossoms? What was even worse was that they had brought the little devil of their family. He was just an ordinary collateral family member of the Qin family. He had neither money nor status. The little devil in front of him with purple eye sockets was the treasure of the Qin family. If he didn't handle it well today, he wouldn't be able to explain himself when he went back. Why don't we go to the temple and find a place to sit? Li Xian turned his head to look at Li Yi and suggested. Li Yi agreed with his idea very much. It didn't feel good to stand here and be stared at like a monkey. The naughty kid's face was bruised, and he had to find a place to apply some medicine. Stop. Seeing that the two people seemed to be really planning to leave, Chen Liqing stepped forward and said loudly, "Don't you think you owe us an explanation? What do you want? Just say it." Li Xian pointed at a few guards. They understood and stepped forward to stand in front of the crowd. Li Xian looked at them and said impatiently, "Do you want to come one by one or all at once?" Arrogant, too arrogant. This was the most intuitive feeling of Chen Liqing and the men behind him. That person looks gentle, like someone who has been educated. How can he be so rude? Let's sit down and talk. If the other party also has a strong background, we just need to apologize and symbolically break a few legs. Both of us will have face and the matter will be solved perfectly. Do we have to fight? All the guards who have martial arts on their side have their legs broken. How can a few scholars fight with those people? Aren't they courting death? Compared to Chen Liqing and the others, the surrounding people felt differently. Especially the eyes of the young women under the veil, they were all quietly glowing. The surrounding crowd naturally had to stand on the side of truth. High Duke Chen's servants used their power to bully others. Chen Liqing was just continuing to be vicious. As for the two young masters, they were obviously in the right. Of course, the most important thing was that the two of them were really handsome. Humph, we are scholars. How can we be like those boorish people in the mountains? Chen Liqing snorted coldly. A disdainful expression appeared on his face, covering the fear just now. He said, "Why don't we have a civil battle? If you win, we will let bygones be bygones. If we win, you need to personally apologize, and the person who attacked just now will have to break one of his legs. How about that?" Chen Liqing wasn't stupid enough to use his shortcomings to compete with others' strengths. They were all scholars, so they should use a more refined method. It was better to recite poems and write essays. As for fighting, it was simply a disgrace to scholars. After they left, they would investigate their background. If the two of them didn't have any background, they would definitely regret being born into this world. Civil battle? Hearing this, Li Xian thought for a while and decisively shook his head. Too troublesome. Let's have a martial battle. Why don't we only send out 2 people and all of you come together? Chapter 313. As the saying goes, when a scholar meets a soldier, he cannot be reasoned with. That was how Chen Liqing felt. The person in front of them was clearly a scholar, but he did not follow the rules of a scholar. He was determined to fight with force instead of words. The other party's bodyguard was obviously an expert that had been carefully selected. Even if there were only 2 of them, the few of them were definitely not a match for them. Only an idiot would agree to a physical fight. Li Xian frowned and looked like he was in a hurry. He said impatiently, "Fine, if you want a literary fight, then so be it. What are the rules?" Seeing that the person in front of him was finally being reasonable, Chen Liqing was overjoyed. He said, "It's simple. It's the season for plum blossoms and we're in the middle of a plum forest. Why don't we use plum blossoms as the theme and compose a poem? Let everyone here judge who is better. This is a literary fight." With that, he whispered to the person beside him, "Hurry and invite young Master Shen over. It's your turn." Li Xian crossed his arms and glanced at Li Yi. Once again he looked like he was watching a good show. The ball went around in a circle and returned to Li Yi. There's no need for a literary fight. Li Yi was more inclined to Li Xian's suggestion. What couldn't be solved with 1 fist? If not, then 2 fists. Clean and efficient, without the slightest hesitation. If Mississippi Lu was here, she would have done this long ago. After spending so much time with her, it was inevitable that she would influence the way she did things. Aha, if you're afraid, you can just admit defeat. Chen Liqing smiled and said, "You only need to apologize in person and break the hands and feet of those who attacked you. Then we can forget about this. What do you think?" After seeing the other party's hesitation, Chen Liqing was even more certain that they were just 2 idiots. The last bit of worry in his heart disappeared. See, if they don't want to, then there's nothing to talk about. Li Xian said with a hint of schadenfreude. The scholars of Qin and Prefecture had already been harmed by him. The mere mention of the name Li Yi would make one's heart tremble. He was very happy to see the same thing happen in the capital. Only then would it be fair. Whispers of discussion could be heard from the surroundings. This Chen Liqing is also a genius with a little bit of fame, but he doesn't know right from wrong and acts shamelessly. Today has really opened my eyes. The people around him are all famous talents in the capital. In terms of poetry, how could those two young masters possibly compete with him? Look, he even invited young Master Shin here. Could it be that, although young Master Shin hasn't been in the capital for long, he made a name for himself during the Lantern Festival, using his poetry to win over most of the scholars? I heard that he intends to curry favor with the Qin family. Looks like Chen Liqing really doesn't care about his reputation anymore in order to win. Even though the surrounding scholars and young ladies were mostly standing on the side of Li Yi and Li Xian, they didn't think that they would be able to win. How could two nameless people compare to those outstanding scholars? What's more, there was a top talent like young Master Shin holding the fort. Does it hurt? Li Yi wiped the dust off the fatty's face and asked. No. Even though he grimaced in pain from being touched, he only breathed in and out, but he didn't admit it at all. He patted his chest and said, "This kid has some backbone." When the fatty showed off his prowess, Li Xian was also there. He walked over and patted his shoulder. Hearing the compliments, the fatty puffed out his chest even more. He held the young lady's hand like a victorious rooster. "Brother Shin, you're here." When a young man walked over, Chen Liqing smiled and went to greet him. The young man called Brother Shin cupped his hands and said, "I wonder why Brother Chen called me over? I do have something to trouble Brother Shin with." Chen Liqing smiled and said, "Let's go over and talk." "Ah, we're all friends, there's no need to be so formal." The young man looked at Chen Liqing in surprise and said with a smile, but he kept an eye on Chen Liqing. He knew that even though he called these people brothers on the surface, they were all from wealthy families in the capital. He was just an outsider. With the difference in status, they wouldn't treat him as a friend. Moreover, the scholars of the capital and Qin and had always looked down on each other. If it weren't for the fact that he had no background in the capital and needed their help, and the fact that they needed his poetry, they wouldn't be so friendly on the surface. As he brought him over, Chen Liqing briefly explained what had happened. He smiled, "We are scholars, so we're not like those boorish mountain people who rely on strength to win. It's a disgrace to our culture. But if it's a battle of words, we'll need Brother Shin's help. After all, in terms of poetry, Brother Shin is still better. This way we'll be absolutely safe." "Brother Chin, you are being too modest. The Lantern Festival is just my luck. All of you here are famous scholars in the capital. How could I dare to show off in front of you all?" The young man cupped his hands and said. The two complimented each other, and the crowd automatically opened up a path for them. Chen Liqing walked to the front and looked at Li Yi. "For the sake of fairness, each side will send one scholar to fight, and one poem will decide the winner." He still wanted to save face in front of others. He couldn't let a group of famous scholars bully two nameless juniors. As long as Xin Zhao made a move, it would be enough to sweep them away. Even though Xin Zhao came from Qin, and it was said that when he was there he was quite famous. In terms of poetry, there weren't many in the capital who could guarantee that they could beat him. With him here they wouldn't lose today. Li Yi helped the naughty child dust off his body and turned around. Xin Zhao's heart sank when he saw that silhouette when he walked over from the other side. When that person turned around and saw his face, Xin Zhao's heart finally sank to the bottom of the valley. As the second scholar of Qin, and countless people followed him wherever he went. Countless young mistresses pursued him, and he could even make the prostitutes pay him money if he wanted to. Of course, this was all in the past. He didn't want to be the leader of the scholars of Qin and prefecture. Why did he come to the capital? It was because he didn't have the face to stay in Qin and prefecture. One poem, Immortal at the Magpie Bridge, and one poem, Shuadiao Getu, made him lose all of his pride there. It wasn't until he came to the capital and made a name for himself during the Lantern Festival that he regained some confidence. In terms of poetry, he wasn't afraid of Yang Yanzhou. He wasn't afraid of all the scholars of Qin and prefecture. He wasn't even afraid of the famous scholars of the capital, except for one person. That person was standing right in front of him. "Brother Shin, I'll have to trouble you with this poem." Chen Liqing walked over and patted his shoulder with a smile. After seeing Xin Zhao's poems, he had unparalleled confidence in Xin Zhao. He was also the one who was least likely to lose. If he could help him regain his face today, even if it was just a little bit of effort, it wouldn't matter if he managed to get on the Qin family's good side. Xin Zhao came back to his senses and finally realized what Chen Liqing wanted him to do. "Brother Qin." Xin Zhao turned around and looked at Chen Liqing with an incomparably serious expression as he slowly spoke. I think you guys should fight. Chapter 3:14. Good. Seeing Xin Zhao open his mouth, Chen Liqing was just about to praise, "Good poem." As soon as the word good left his mouth, he suddenly realized something was wrong. He stared at Xin Zhao and asked uncertainly, What did you just say?" Xin Zhao sighed and looked at Chen Liqing. "Brother Chen, believe me, if you choose to fight, your chances of winning will be higher. Brother Shen, now is not the time to joke." Chen Liqing raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Xin Zhao's behavior was very abnormal. Although Chen Liqing did not think much of him because of his family background, he had to admit that he was very talented in poetry. It was not difficult for him to write a poem out of his mouth. Under normal circumstances, Xin Zhao, who wanted to curry favor with the Chen family, would not offend him over such a small matter. In reality, he had not shown any intention of refusing, until just now. Chen Liqing's gaze immediately turned to the young man opposite him. "What's going on? What's wrong with Xin Zhao?" Confusion appeared on the faces of the people behind Chen Liqing. For a moment they could not understand what he had just said. As for the people around them, their minds were even more muddled. "Brother Li, long time no see." Xin Zhao raised his head and raised his hands in a salute to Li Yi. For some reason, after seeing this person who had changed the course of his fate again, his heart was calm and there was not a trace of hatred. In these days in the capital, he often thought back to the past. After losing the pride of the past, he suddenly found that the frivolity and arrogance of his youth, in the eyes of today, was just a joke. That young man had woken him up with a resounding slap, letting him know that there was always a higher mountain. He had completely shattered his pitiful arrogance, but it had also made him settle some things that he had never had before. "Brother Shin, long time no see." To be able to see an old friend from Qing'an Prefecture here, Li Yi was slightly surprised and also raised his hands in a salute. Although the two of them had once clashed, there was no unforgettable hatred. To be able to see each other in the distant capital was not easy. Of course, the most important reason why Li Yi did not hate him was because he had taken advantage of him at that time. At this time, he faintly felt that the Xin Zhao in front of him was not the same as before. So they know each other. Everyone came to a sudden realization. No wonder Xin Zhao was unwilling to stand up for Chen Liqing. If that young master was an old acquaintance of his, then everything would make sense. Chen Liqing's face was a little embarrassed. He couldn't help but feel some resentment towards Xin Zhao. He sneered and said, "Xin Zhao, do you think that without you we can't compose a poem?" This time she didn't even call him Brother Shen. Xin Zhao smiled and said, "I know that my talent in poetry is far from Brother Li's, so I won't embarrass myself. Brother Chen and the other brothers are all famous scholars in the capital, brimming with talent. Naturally, you don't need me." He naturally understood the meaning behind Chen Liqing's words. He was afraid that after today they would no longer tolerate him. However, this was no longer important. These days he had been trying to cling on to others, and there seemed to be something stuck in his heart. When he said those words just now, he suddenly felt a long-lost carefree feeling. No matter how conceited Chen Liqing was, he wasn't conceited enough to think that his poetry was better than Xin Zhao's. He only thought that Xin Zhao's words were modest. However, even if he couldn't beat Xin Zhao, couldn't he be compared to a nameless kid? Have you all thought it through? If you really can't compose a poem, then admit defeat. Chen Liqing sneered and no longer cared about Xin Zhao. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Why are you composing a poem? Go home and dream." Being forced to copy poems was something he had experienced many times. Li Yi had already lost interest in it. He waved his hand and said, "How old are you? What's the point of fighting all day? Can you not be so childish? Let's go." He patted the little fatty's head and turned to walk towards the exit. The little fatty hurriedly grabbed the little girl's hand and ran after him. "Big brother, wait for me." The one selling buns in front, "Wait a moment too." Chen Liqing stared blankly at their backs as they left. His face turned green and then white. There was a mouthful of hot blood in his chest. They left just like that. What was going on? Even if they wanted to leave, they had to apologize and break the legs of those servants before they could leave. "All of you stop right there." Chen Liqing shouted loudly. Just as he was about to chase after them, the young man who left turned around and revealed 2 rows of white teeth. He smiled and said, "If you follow me again, I'll break your legs too." After saying that, Li Xian laughed loudly. He was in a good mood and quickened his pace to chase after them. The group of people who were left looked at each other in dismay. The surrounding people who wanted to watch the show were clearly disappointed. They thought that there would be an exciting battle of words and 2 excellent poems. They didn't expect that one side would retreat without a fight. But thinking about it, they knew that they were no match for Chen Liqing and the other scholars. If they really went to compose a poem, they would be asking for humiliation. They might as well retreat shamelessly. Preposterous. Chen Liqing's face no longer had the slightest trace of elegance. His eyes were about to spit fire. Investigate. When we go down, we must investigate the background of those two fellows. He had suffered such humiliation. If he didn't avenge himself, he was afraid that his heart would never be at peace. Brother Liqing, why are you so angry? Left and right are just two cowardly rats. They don't even have the courage to fight a battle of words. I'm afraid that they don't have a bit of knowledge and can't even compose a decent poem. Left and right are two idiots. After today, there will be no place for them in the circle of scholars in the capital. Absolutely, absolutely. Brother Lu's words make sense. A person beside Chen Liqing comforted him, and the rest of the people revealed looks of disdain on their faces at the right time as they echoed one after another. As for the surrounding people, even though they felt that it was unfair for Chen Liqing to propose a battle of words, the two young masters didn't even have the courage to accept the challenge. Even though they were smart, they didn't have the backbone of a scholar. Haha, they don't have a bit of knowledge, idiots. At this moment, an undisguised laughter rang out from the crowd. The laughter was piercing to the ears. Everyone turned their heads to look. It's Xin Zhao. After discovering the source of the laughter, everyone was stunned. What are you laughing at? Chen Liqing glared fiercely at him and asked. Xin Zhao held his stomach and laughed until he was out of breath. He pointed at Chen Liqing and said, Brother Chen, on your waist, can I take a look at the fan on your waist? Seeing Xin Zhao's expression, Chen Liqing was shocked. Why would he want a fan at this time? Was this Xin Zhao crazy? It was said that once this person became crazy, he could do anything. If one didn't do as he said, who knew what he would do? A trace of fear appeared on Chen Liqing's face. He quickly handed over the fan on his waist. Whoosh! Xin Zhao waved his hand and opened the fan. He smiled and said, You wrote this sworddance on the fan. I believe that Brother Chen likes it a lot? Chen Liqing took a step back. He thought to himself that he liked this sworddance. What did it have to do with Xin Zhao? Xin Zhao stopped laughing. He looked strangely at the scholar who had just called him an idiot. He said, When Brother Lu writes a poem that surpasses this sworddance, then you can go say that others are an idiot. He returned the fan to Chen Liqing and laughed. Brother Chen, you don't need to investigate him anymore. That idiot brother is Qingan Prefecture, Li Yi. Seeing the expressions of Chen Liqing and the other scholars change, Xin Zhao felt extremely carefree. He laughed a few times and turned to leave without looking back. Qingan Prefecture, Li Yi. Even though they didn't know what he looked like, this name was not unfamiliar to the scholars and beauties of the capital. Her pretty face was full of shock. Her cherry lips parted slightly and she took out the round fan from her bosom. There was the immortal magpie bridge that she had personally embroidered. In this world, the best way to become famous was to write an excellent poem. No matter where the poem first appeared, it would eventually be known by all the scholars of the Jing kingdom and be passed down for generations to come. How can this be? How can this be? Chen Liqing's mind was blank as he mumbled to himself. The scholar surnamed Lu's face was red. He wanted to find a hole in the ground to hide in. The surrounding crowd was shocked. A few poems involuntarily appeared in their minds. Under the curtain, the rich young mistress's pretty face was slightly red. Her gaze occasionally looked in the direction of the exit of the plum blossom forest. At this moment, no one would think that the person who left was retreating without a fight. That was disdain, he was right. Chen Liqing was stupid and childish to compete with the scholars who wrote sworddance and Immortal Magpie Bridge. Xin Zhao was not being modest just now. From the beginning to the end, he had treated this matter as a joke. So what if it was Chen Liqing? So what if it was the gifted scholar of the Jing kingdom? Could they make all the women in the world whisper in their boudoirs? If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? And embroider their poems on handkerchiefs? They couldn't. Thinking of this, everyone looked at Chen Liqing with a strange expression. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.